I even have an appropriate shirt on.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we're bringing back Miško. How you doing?
I am doing well. I'm glad to be here again. So always a pleasure to talk to you, man.
I am super pumped to have you on the show. It is always very enlightening to have you sharing what you've been working on. So I'm super excited about that. But before we jump into the tech, let's talk about you for a second. For folks who aren't familiar with your work, do you want to give us a bit of a background, who you are, what you do?
Sure. Currently, I'm a CTO at Builder.io. Builder.io is a headless visual development platform. A bunch of complicated words. I like to explain it simply. Basically, it's like Wix, but
Okay.
headless, meaning you can embed it into your existing application, right? Whereas something like Wix is only hosted, which means you have to host it in some third-party place. So that's what Builder is. I've done other things in my life previously. There's this thing called AngularJS that became super popular. Then there was a follow-up to it called Angular. Before even I did web frameworks, I did this other thing called Clean Code Talk. Some people, where I was trying to convince the world that testing is a good idea, you should do it. And then I had something to do with Karma. And now I'm doing this thing called Qwik, and apparently it's becoming a bad habit of mine to keep building frameworks. So,
So I'm actually really curious about this. Qwik is a framework that I assume arose out of a need that you had in your own web dev. I assume Angular kind of came from the same general need. So in your career, why do you think you have created multiple frameworks? Like, what's the driver that leads you to do that?
I just want to make it easier to build web apps, really what it comes down to, right? Like you have a goal of being able to build something and you realize the amount of effort it goes into it and you go like, and it doesn't get built. And so if you can
Hmm.
lower that barrier of entry for people, then cooler things can get built. And as of right now, I think we're in the world where it's relatively easy to build just about anything you want. The
Hmm.
thing that isn't necessarily easy is to make it also performant. And this is where Qwik comes in.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So, we've done an episode on Qwik, so we don't need to do the like nuts and bolts for folks who are very interested, as you should be in this. Please head over to the Learn with Jason site and check out this the original one here that we did with Miško on Qwik Core. Drop that in the chat right now. And so at a high level, the thing that I keep hearing about Qwik and the thing that seems most exciting is that it's different from what other frameworks have promised. Where when you look at Next and Gatsby and Nuxt and these sort of the first, maybe the first generation of meta frameworks, you could call it, the promise was you'll write your code in your chosen framework, React, Vue, whatever, and it will be server-side rendered to HTML, and then it'll come back to the browser, and when it gets to the browser, it'll be re-transformed into a full working React or Vue or Svelte or whatever app again.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of extra work that happens with that. We've heard people talk about hydration. We can talk about it a little bit more in a minute. But then we've got this other generation, this like newer generation of frameworks, and what most of them have been talking about is this idea of partial hydration or zero.js by default, where things like Astro and Eleventy are letting you build in a kind of a meta framework style, but what they're rendering, unless you specifically opt into it, is just HTML and CSS. There's no JavaScript to be found in the default output of an Astro site. And now Qwik on the surface feels very similar to Astro in that it's like, hey, let's do less JS and things like that. But Qwik is very different, and you talk about it as resumability. So can you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about what's the difference between like this partial hydration or no JS by default and resumability? What's the I guess maybe the philosophical difference and then the benefits?
Yeah. So, um, Sorry, my head is like going to 20 different directions.
So I did ask you like 5 questions at once. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think one way to think about it is that resumable applications are kind of like streaming, right? In a sense, what I mean by that is, when you go watch a movie, you don't have to download the whole movie before you can start watching. And resumability is kind of goes off on the same idea, which is that you shouldn't have to download all of JavaScript for you to be able to interact with the application, right? You should be able to only download the code necessary for this particular app. For this particular interaction, right?
Gotcha.
So even if you have a super complicated website with lots and lots of buttons, you don't need all that code because you're only going to click one button at a time, right? And there are priorities. Some buttons are more important than others, right? And so you should download the more important code first, and then the less likely to be clicked on button later, and so on and so forth. And in order to get to that world, in order to be able to execute things kind of like out of order, or rather, more importantly, to order to not execute a whole bunch of stuff, you need resumability. Because the way existing frameworks work is they say, well, I need to figure out where all of the listeners are. And the way they do that is they re-execute all of the components on a page. And by that point, you've just forced to download all of the application. And what's nice about resumability is that, well, you don't need to do that. That already has happened on a server. When a server executed the code, the resumability, we already collected the information about where the listeners are. And so on a client, it's only the listener that has to get downloaded. And people oftentimes say like, well, you're just like mixing words here. It's just hydration by another name. It's partial hydration, etc. And I want to dispel that, because when you have hydration, like the way to think about it is, you're on a server and let's say you have 10 components, and each component, when it renders, it prints a number. So on a server, you're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? Same thing has to happen in Qwik. Like that's the same thing. You also see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But then weird things happen on a client. So on a client in the regular system, you'll get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 again. But on the Qwik side, nothing. Right?
Okay.
Then you go and interact with a particular component. Let's say you click a button that adds to the shopping cart. Then all you see is the shopping cart. Let's say shopping cart is 8. You just see 8 re-renders and nothing else. And in a classical system, even if you have islands or whatever, we can argue about when exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 will execute, but it will execute at some point. And more importantly, what I want to point out is that executes twice, right? Those console logs will show up once on a server and once on a client. And so now the only thing with partial hydration or lazy hydration or progressive hydration we're arguing about is when exactly do these numbers show up? Do they show up all together? Are they spread across in time? Are there just islands that happen at some point? But they still happen at some point. The beauty of resumability is like, well, they already happened on a server, and therefore they will not happen again in the client. And so because they don't happen again in the client, huge amount of code never has to be shipped to the client. Like the code is just fundamentally not there. And because the code isn't there, you don't execute it, you don't download it, you have huge amount of savings that you can get. And most importantly, you can get into this idea of streaming. You can get to this idea that as you're using your application, more and more code shows up that's specific to the particular button or interaction that you have done. And I really want to point out, because at this point, like a lot of people are like, oh, but it's going to be slow on a first interaction. There's a whole system built into Qwik for prefetching code, so then make sure that even on a slow, spotty network under a tunnel, you will still get your interaction instantly from the user's point of view.
Okay. So to repeat this back to make sure that I'm understanding it, and just for anybody who's listening to hear it a second time, because I think it's a big idea. The main difference here is that traditionally the way that meta frameworks have solved the problem of like building in code and needing some things to be interactive and some things not to be is originally with, say, Next.js, you build the application, it renders once, all the data needs to be fetched on the server side and then injected into the components, which get rendered to HTML. That gets delivered to the browser. In addition to that, all the data also gets injected into a JSON script blob at the bottom of the page. So you've got double the data there, and all of the JavaScript that renders the page, even if it's like, for example, a blog where nothing on the page is interactive, you still have to send all of the JavaScript for the components and all that stuff. So the first thing you load is the page that's rendered, the HTML, CSS that came out of the JavaScript. Then at the bottom, the JavaScript mounts, executes, finds that JSON blob of all the data, reruns the entire React app, and then replaces the DOM with the React app so that you've got the interactive JavaScript application there. So you've not only shipped the data twice to the browser, but you've also now executed the same code 2 different times in a way that is, in the case of a blog or like a marketing site, pretty wasteful. And so
yeah, so rendering happens twice, once on the server, once on the client.
Right. And the data transfer has to happen multiple times as well because of the way that it gets delivered. And so then we start looking at, say, Astro. So what Astro is doing is Astro is the same general idea. You build in your components and server side, it gets rendered down to HTML. And then what Astro does is it just says, well, let's skip that part where we hydrate on the client. Unless you say this piece is interactive, and you say, like, is dynamic or whatever their tag is that gets it to load, which then causes just that one component to rehydrate. So it's the same general concept. It's just limited in scope. So instead of the whole page, it's the one component, but you're still shipping the component rendered. You're shipping the JavaScript to re-render the component and shipping any data that needs to be re-rendered in that component, and kind of doing the same hydration thing. It's just a smaller section of the page. So what you're saying with resumability is that it's flipping that whole thing on its head. And you're saying when you render in the server side step, you're taking that data and you're putting it into the HTML, but there's not a JSON blob with all the data of the page, and you're not loading JavaScript that then re-renders the whole page into an app. You're instead just adding a couple listeners that say, is this element being interacted with? And if so, get the JavaScript, but not the data, because the data is already there. This is the part that actually blew my mind when you first showed me Qwik, is that you've effectively found a way to serialize state across the server client boundary that doesn't require just starting from scratch.
That's right.
I feel like this is something that people have talked about for a long time, and it doesn't typically get done. So what do you think the barrier was, and how did you specifically overcome this barrier to get this like serialization between server and client to work?
Yeah. So the problem, really, if you think about it, is you have a listener, right? The problem that frameworks face is you navigate to a page, and the framework has no idea, is this interactive or not? I don't know. And the only way to kind of figure out is to visit every single component from the root to every single leaf and say, hey, do you have a click listener? Or do you have any kind of listener, right? And if you do have a listener, the thing that the component gives to the framework is a closure that says, this is my listener. And then once the framework has the closures, the framework can, do its job. The problem is that, if you have if you have no closures on the page, the framework still has to go and do the whole thing. And then people are like, yeah, but I can just remove the script. Like, sure, but as a developer, you did it, right? The framework didn't figure this out automatically. You did it as a developer. But the moment you have a single button that is interactive, you need to have the framework. And the way the framework finds that button is it starts at the root and just navigates through all the pieces and figures it out and eventually gets a hold of the closure. And now you can click on that particular button. So what's unique about Qwik is that we still do that on a server, but on a server, the framework's like, I don't know what to do with closure. I'm just going to throw it away. But what Qwik does on a server, it says, I'm going to save this closure. And then when you wake up on a client, instead of going through the tree and saying, where are all my closures? The framework just knows, like, the closure is right here on this button. This button has a closure. And not only that, this is the closure if you need to execute it, right? And this is the hard part, because this is the part that's super difficult. Like, how exactly do you move a closure from the server to the client? That's the mind-blowing part, right? It's super hard.
Well, right, because a closure is like not just a function, it's a function that has state contained within it. And
That's
is
right.
a super challenging thing to serialize because, I know that I've worked on projects in the past where a good example of this is, when we were working on some Gatsby features way back in the day, one of the goals was to try to pull in like statically rendered things and parse them and replace them in the code, right? And so the very first thing that you run into is that you can't just like grab the code. You have to understand the entire code base, because somebody could set a variable anywhere, somebody could do like anything anywhere in the code base. So you're not just like looking at this one function and saying, okay, grab that function. You have to like grab everything, all of the code, and then parse it all down and understand, well, this variable was actually set to this thing, and then you're wrapping all that up in this closure. That's an incredibly sneakily hard problem to solve. So
Yes.
how do you solve that?
Well, I mean, the realization is that closure is two parts. Closure closes over a bunch of variables like state of the component, right? Let's say you
Mm-hmm.
have a closure that increments a counter.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that closure closes over is like, what's the current count? And also, what is the component that I am incrementing this count on, and things of that sort, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. And the second part that the closure closes over is, well, the actual JavaScript. So we know how to serialize the JavaScript. Well, that's easy. That's just .js file, right? And bundlers know how to do that. And we also know how to serialize the data. Well, that's just JSON stringify. But
Mm-hmm.
the thing that's hard is, when you have a closure, it's like packaged up together. How do you like
Right.
tease them apart? You can't take a closure and pass it to JSON.stringify. That doesn't work. And so the magic of Qwik is basically that it knows how to do that through some help of compilers. It knows how to tease the information apart and then serialize it in such a way that it can be reconstructed on a client. So when you click a button on the client, the Qwik can just be like, oh, I need this piece of code and I need to attach it to this data, and this is the closure. Go do your thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the way everybody else does it, it says, I need this closure. How about I just rerun the applications from a very, very beginning, visit every single component on this page. And as I am collecting this stuff, I will eventually come across this closure. And now I can listen to a component, right? So
Right.
all of that part just disappears.
Well, yeah,
And
and
this is why we call it resumable.
and I think this is to me, this is the part that is most technically impressive about Qwik, because I have looked into trying to do this, and I always hit enough edge cases and weird walls that I'm just not willing to push through and try to actually build out that compiler step, because it's a hard problem to solve. It's very difficult to actually crawl the full tree and not miss things, and not get swallowed up by edge cases. So so when I saw this working, it blew my mind a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about Qwik City, because Qwik City is to Qwik as Next.js is to React, or SvelteKit is to Svelte. What are we doing in Qwik City that's not available in Qwik the framework itself?
Yeah, so Qwik City is just a meta framework like many others. The biggest kind of win is that it runs on top of Qwik, and so it gets this resumability out of the box. What I like to talk about is, when you build applications, the path of least resistance, meaning the easiest thing for the developer to do in order to get the job done, and the path of best performance are not the same thing. And with Qwik City, we tried really hard to make sure that the path of least resistance is actually the path of best performance. And as a result, we get this. And the only reason we can do that is because we have this Qwik, right? We have the
Mm-hmm.
superpower that we know how to serialize closures and lazy load them and do all kinds of tricks that existing systems can't really do. And so that's kind of the uniqueness. But we're also trying to do some innovative stuff in Qwik City. Mainly, we want to bring type information into routing,
Mm-hmm.
into search parameters, and basically make it so that the type information flows not just in your code, but also through URLs, search parameters, your forms, submissions, and so on and so forth.
Got it.
That's still work in progress. That's not there yet, but
Okay.
the other pieces are already there.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. So then that means that as a dev, if I'm reaching for Qwik City, it's going to give me some of the familiar things that I have in Remix or Next or Astro or any of these frameworks where I've got
That's right.
like the file-based routing and that kind of stuff. And that's great.
You're gonna get this laziness and lazy execution and resumability and breaking up your code and lazy loading and all these pieces, prefetching of the code without any sort of effort, which is the unique bit, right?
Yeah, and I've heard this put. So I've written about this idea in the past of like make the right thing the easy thing, and I've heard it put on another way that I really liked, which is make the right things easy and the wrong things hard. When you're talking about the path of least resistance, or the better way to put it is when a developer is under a deadline and they're going to take every available shortcut. The shortcuts that are available to them should lead to the best decisions. Like they should,
That's right.
Cutting all the corners should lead to the optimal outcome. And I think that's something that we've started to learn as a community, where more and more of the frameworks are focusing on like, hey, if you just use the defaults, you're getting the best possible outcome, instead of what it was before where, you would get like, all right, here, install Webpack. And then if you want it to be optimized, you need to install all of these plugins. And that was fine because people would build boilerplates for it. But ultimately it meant that a dev in a hurry was going to cut some of those corners. Oh, I can't get this minimizer plugin configured properly, so I'm just going to leave it out. And then, okay, now performance suffers a little bit. Oh, I can't figure out this other thing. Leave it out. And more performance suffers. And so I'm really happy to see that inverting, where now you almost have to like go in and turn things off to make the modern crop of meta frameworks bad, which makes me happy. Like I love that by default we're incentivizing using the defaults because the defaults are the right thing, and that makes it easier to learn. It makes it easier to switch between projects. It makes it easier to like port code between places because you're not fighting plugin config and all these like subtle differences that really trip you up back in the day when you were in the Babel Webpack, etc. world. So this is I feel like this is a good, like, I'm very happy to see this evolution of building for the web, where this is what we're focused on right now.
Yes, I have a kind of an interesting story about this. Like I recently wrote a blog post comparing different movie apps. There's this test.js which allows you to build movie apps on different frameworks, right?
Oh, right.
And it didn't go over as well as I hoped. Basically every single framework author came out of the woodwork and said, that's unfair because like you didn't do this optimization, or the app that you're comparing is actually badly written because of this. And I'm sitting there, I'm kind of going like, that's kind of my point, right? Because yes, these are suboptimally written things, but like, why are the defaults not optimal, right? Like there was nothing special that the Qwik developer had to do in order to do this. Like it just came out of the box this way. And now everybody else is basically saying like, oh yeah, you're comparing it to this framework X, but like the person who wrote it, like they did all these things and they should have really done this other things. And like, it's not performant. And like, let me change a bunch of things. And look, now it's performant. It's like, but why did you have to do this to begin with?
Yeah, I do think that's, we're seeing less. I think, before the tooling was as good as it is today, it was very reasonable to say like, look, I can't cover all the edge cases because it was too big. Things were too new. But as we're seeing advancement in tooling, it's getting harder and harder to stand behind that particular excuse where you blame the developer. Because there's proof out there that you can build great defaults and get great experiences. And to the counter of that, I have also seen that there is a certain flavor of developer that wants to get in and touch everything, and anybody can make anything slow with significant effort, right? Like
yes. You can always do that.
So I think the trick is, it's almost it's resetting expectations. Like the framework authors are starting to flip around the way that they think about it. And I'm seeing this with, what you just said, where, it's not the developer's fault if the framework is slow. It's the framework developer's fault, unless the developer has specifically ejected or specifically changed something about the configuration that intentionally makes it slow because they want to, I don't know, they wanted to add like some transformation thing that they liked, and that like it shortcuts all of the optimizations and break stuff. Sure, of course, if a developer does that, then yeah, that's on the developer. There's no way the framework author can prevent somebody from customizing things. But
I want to point out, like in the current frameworks, it's actually hard to do that because they do ship the whole tree, right? Like whether if you have a complicated site and the only piece of interactivity is this counter or this menu, you are still shipping the whole app, even though none of that stuff is needed, and it is extremely difficult to not ship the whole app. Like you got to do some serious hacking to kind of figure out how not to do that, because fundamentally that's how frameworks work, right? They start at the root component and they iterate and visit every single component on the page looking for listeners.
Right. And I think so this is actually something I just had Shande Person on the show, and we were talking about performance and the optimization of performance, and where is the line in an application between I am optimizing performance because it's better for my users and I'm optimizing performance because I want to see my score go up, right? And one of the things that I do find interesting,
I have a story for you.
But one of the things that I found interesting in this space is that there's definitely like there's good enough, and then there's ideal, and then there's okay, now you're like code golfing performance. And so this is something, I think it's an exercise for every developer to find the right level of pragmatism, where sometimes you've got years and years and years of code built up and it's not feasible to like burn your entire app to the ground and port it to another framework. And so this isn't about the FOMO of like you're doing it right or you're doing it wrong. It's about making the right trade-offs and decisions for your code base, and recognizing that like you might be able to eke out micro performance at certain places, but if the users aren't noticing those changes, then it's not necessarily like worth the effort. So it's more about like making decisions about new things that we build, or looking at the things that are really bad. Like if you're looking at a piece of your app and it's just absolute trash from a performance standpoint, and I've been in teams like this where pages were taking 10 plus 20 plus seconds to load because it was so poorly architected, just because it had accumulated like geological layers of crap over time.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
And so you like that was worth burning down, rebuilding in the most performant possible way. We looked at best practices, we made that choice. But I want to be careful, because whenever we start talking about performance, especially when we're talking about something like Qwik, that's such a big shift from where things are. I just don't want anybody to like leave this show going, oh God, I got to rebuild everything. Like no. It's good to be thinking about this. Keep it in mind for future projects. If you want to, if you've got something that's like urgently in need of it, this is, that's a great opportunity to go give this a shot. But please don't go try to convince your boss to like burn down your entire app if the app is already good enough.
I would argue that it's a good idea, even if you don't rebuild anything, to just play with Qwik and just understand the different point of view and different mental model, because it's going to, just understanding these things is important.
Yes.
So do play with it. Do play with it. I'm not saying you have to rebuild it, but do play with it.
The learning and the play is so critical. I think that's been core to my success, and I think that it's a really important thing to just embrace, is this idea of constant learning. And then I think it's the opposite of curiosity and play is the pragmatism and the self-control and the ability to edit, to recognize when is an effort going to actually have enough upside for you, for your business, for your customers, that it's like why is that worth doing versus this feature your customers have asked for, or things like that. There is a line where it makes sense, but value is the most important thing, and a lot of times performance is ultra high value to customers, and that's when it's worth considering. But if you've already got great performance, maybe build them a feature, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, that was a little bit of a tangent, but so okay.
Should we do some coding?
Let's do some coding. I'm gonna flip us over into the pair programming view, and I'm going to
tell you the story that I told you about.
Yes,
okay?
please do.
the story is, we were talking to a customer about using Qwik, and they're like, "Yeah, we're at, I'm looking at this other company, and I'm not going to be nameless, and I'm looking at their light speed scores, or sorry, light house scores, and they're getting a 98 out of the whatever out of 100 using the same technology we want to use. Like, it's fine." And so we're like, "Huh? How are they getting such amazing scores? I got to look into it." So we spent some time digging, and it turns out their server looked for the user agent and disable sending JavaScript to the lighthouse in order to get a high score. Right? And so, like, it's an app that doesn't work. And so we came back to them and we're like, we looked into it, and like, this is what's happening. Like, this isn't what you think is happening.
So that is,
Google doesn't use this, right? Google uses Core Web Vitals. So
Right.
Lighthouse is just for developers. Core Web Vitals is actual data collected by actual users visiting an actual devices with actual network.
right, and that's the
data that's actually, yeah.
What I've heard that called RUM, real user measurement, and that is
Yes.
real. That's the data we should be looking at. Like, Lighthouse is great to observe as like a heuristic, like directional information, but what real people are actually experiencing in your application is definitely the critical piece to be paying attention to there.
That's right.
Okay, so let's see here. Before we get started, I just want to do a quick shout out. We've got Rachel here with us today from White Coat Captioning, taking down all these words. Thank you so much, Rachel. That's available on the homepage of the site, which I will grab and drop in the chat if I can find my chat window. There it is. And that is made possible through the support of our sponsors, Netlify, NX, New Relic, all kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people, which I very much appreciate. And then we are talking today to Miško, who is on Twitter at mhevery. And go and follow that there. And we are talking about Qwik, which I'll drop a link here. And then we're also talking about Qwik City, which I will drop a link to here. And it looks like what I would do if I didn't have you sitting here with me is I would start running through this doc here. But since I do have you sitting here with me, I'm going to open a terminal and wait for you to tell me what to do.
npm create Qwik at latest.
Qwik at latest.
And we can just probably
wait, I gotta stop. I gotta move into a new folder. Try that again.
And, make sure you have node 16. It's going to complain if you don't.
Node 16?
Yeah, it didn't complain, so you're probably fine.
I'm at 18.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, 18 is bigger than 16, so.
Oh, okay. So it's a minimum, not a required version.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go Qwik City and
just take the basic one, yeah.
Basic app. I do want the dependencies. I'm going to go into Qwik City here. I'll get a init so that my my file highlighting works, and then I'm going to open it up in VS Code. And then I will also start a live share project once that turns on. Okay, so got a URL here. I'm going to drop that in our secret chat. And that'll let you join, Miško. Okay. So I'm now looking at a Qwik City app. I'm going to go side by side here so that we can get things started. And then if I want to run this, I run.
If you want to run it on the command line, you should just type in npm run deb.
There we go. Opened in the wrong tab. Here we go, over here. All right. So I've got my local host running here, 5173, and I'm looking at the raw code, and I'm ready. What's next?
Right. So let's take a quick tour. So there is a source folder. If you open up the source folder and you go in there, you will find a special folder called routes. And inside of the routes, you see that we have index.tsx, we have layout.tsx, and we have a subfolder called flower, and it also has index.tsx inside of a flower. So basically, this application has two routes. There is a root route /, which is pointing to the route / index.tsx, and there is a subroute called flower / index.tsx.
So if I just go to flower,
if you navigate to the bottom of the page, there's a button to go to the flower. Here we go. Yeah, that's what it is. So that's this particular part. The only other part to kind of pay attention to is that there is the layout file. And the layout file basically does the header and a footer and all the stuff that you need around your particular page, right?
Got it.
And the slot is the location where the your index.tsx basically gets inserted into. And you can have nested layouts and all kinds of other magical bits.
Got it. And so slots are, I think Vue has the concept of slots. There are outlets in Remix, React Children.
Props.children.
Yeah, props.children. I think web components have slots as well. So if you've used other frameworks, hopefully this is familiar. And okay, so that makes sense. We got a header component. We got our footer component. All makes sense to me. So we go into our index here. And I'm going to head back to the home page. Oops. Let's go back to my homepage. Here we go. And I will...
That's not the homepage. That's the actual homepage.
Yeah, right. So here we've got our root, and I can say something like, hi, chat, and I'm going to save. And we've got live reloading. Okay, so we've got all the things that I expect from a meta framework. It's doing the things I want. What should we dig into first? Like I'm not sure what the right features are to highlight, so I'll let you kind of guide us here.
Yeah. So maybe inside of your browser, open up DevTools, and I just want to point out that on the homepage, actually no JavaScript got downloaded, but in the flowers, only the JavaScript associated with the component got downloaded. So if you look at the network tab,
okay, so I'm in the network tab. I'm reloading.
There's going to be a little bit of JavaScript coming from Vite. So if you click on a button that says JS,
let's see, we got here's our click on the JS. There it is.
You see under filter it says all fetch etc. Just one that says JS. Here we go.
Yep, got it.
So that shows just the JS. Vite doesn't count because we're in a dev mode. So I usually in the filter say Vite and click the button that says invert to say show me everything but Vite, because this is dev mode and in production they will not have Vite.
Okay, so that's my...
If you refresh, so I see a bunch of other things in there. Why do I see other things?
That's a great question. This is... Well, these are Chrome extensions. Hold on. Okay, we're going to do this in a...
Yeah, do an incognito window.
Yeah, here we go. Incognito window. And we're going to hit here. Going to turn on the network tab again. We'll do Vite, invert, refresh. And so we got index.qwik.js, core.mjs, and the service.
Oh, so I see. I think what's happening is that you're hovering over certain commands and the system's like, oh, he's about to click it. So I'm going to start prefetching the code. But if you go to the flowers, if you go to the bottom, if you scroll to the bottom of, there we go. You will see that only the flower related code got downloaded. This is going to make more sense when we kind of build our own page, I think. So let's just start building our own page.
Okay,
let's make a new folder under routes. I usually build like a contacts application, but whatever you think is a good folder, let's make a new folder over there. And inside of that folder, create a new file called index.tsx.
Got it.
Okay, and so the only requirement is that this particular file has to have a default export of a component. So you can, we can put in export default,
and we'll call this.
Sure, you can do that and just return a function, return some JSX, right? Okay, now the thing that's unique about Qwik is that you have to wrap the function inside of component $. So export default component $. No, not the JSX, the function itself.
Oh, the function itself. Okay, so I want to do, like, if I do one of these, then I can do export default.
No, you can do it all inline. You can do it all inline.
Oh, okay.
So export default component $, parentheses.
$, that's the one I'm after.
There we go.
Like that.
Okay. And we have to import the component $. It should, I believe you just do control whatever dot or something, it should auto import.
Oh, come on.
If you click on component $.
That's the one. Add import. Hey.
There you go. And then get rid of the component $, from the return JSX part.
Oh, right.
Okay. Now here Vite sometimes has trouble. So let's see. Let's navigate to the page, see if it works. If not, Vite needs to be restarted. But let's try it. When you create a new route, sometimes Vite is not doing something right.
Okay. It is.
Okay. And if you don't see anything, that's because, restart the Vite. So go to the command line and shut down a server and restart it.
Okay. There we go.
And so now if you refresh the page, it should see it over there. Now, notice that we didn't do anything about layout. And so already we have existing components on the page, right?
Interesting. Okay. So it's picking up all of the, everything from the layouts automatically.
That's
so,
right.
So it's a magic, like this is a magic file. If we put something in here, this will get used.
Oh, which one? The layout?
Layout.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
That's right. If you don't want to use it or you want to override it, you can add an exclamation point on your file name. So index exclamation point .tsx would basically say don't descend into a layout.
Okay, I got it.
But this is fine. We can do that too. So if you have the Vite filtered, you should see that no JavaScript got downloaded because, well, if you think about it, this page doesn't really have JavaScript, right?
Let's go.
So again, if you go to the network tab and you filter out
invert JavaScript. There we go. No JavaScript.
Right. And, if you think about it, like what do you need JavaScript for this page for? Like there's nothing here that you could possibly do to require JavaScript. So why send it? Right. But you as a developer didn't have to think about it. You just wrote some code and it kind of worked. So at this point, let's maybe build a simple counter, just kind of get people ideas on how this works. And then we can probably fetch some data from the server.
Sure. Okay. So
or do you want to just go and fetch some data from the server?
Yeah, let's do the hello world. I think that's kind of useful to do. So we'll have we'll do like a little div. We'll do a span that's going to have the count, and we'll set that to 0. We'll do a button and say increment, and that'll give us kind of some basics. And then we need to make these actually function. So to do that, I don't remember how Qwik does this.
So you say const count equals use signal, and you pass in 0 as an argument, right? So you're saying the count starts at 0.
Okay.
And then you actually do count.value, but I think count also works. And then for the increment for the button, you say on click $. And there you just say count.value ++.
Oh, it doesn't like what I just did. Must be an event. Oh, needs to be a callback, right?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes.
Okay. All right. So here we go. We're going to do, whoops. Close that down. Refresh the page. No JavaScript. I have hovered. And now we've got some JavaScript.
Yeah. So when you click on it, it downloads the code. Now, I want to point out something interesting. So let's click at the first file that it downloaded, right? So the first file contains, if you kind of look at the content of the file in the response, that contains our count.value ++, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the second file it downloaded is just the framework itself. It's huge because it's in the Vite and it has all the comments and help in there.
Yeah, this is like the uncompressed dev build. Yeah.
Yeah. It's about 20 kilobytes in production. So those are the two files that it downloaded. And I will notice what didn't download. What didn't download is the JSX associated with the component.
Right.
So let's say inside of our component, we say, before we do return, we just say console log, counter or something like that. Sorry, counter as in like the word counter.
Oh.
So inside of strings.
Okay.
So if you refresh the page, you will see that the word counter shows up in your console, right? So not the console, but like your terminal, because it
Ah,
executed on a
yes.
server, right? And so on a server, we had to execute that piece of code. Like there's no way around this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But notice that no matter what you do on the client, the counter will never show up. Like the console never says
Oh,
this.
okay. Okay. So this, I think, is this would be a little bit of a kind of headbendy for me as a dev coming in fresh to this, where my experience is that components execute on the client side. So there's a new model here where I actually have to explicitly call something out to be client side if I need it to run.
Oh no,
No. Okay.
it's automatic. Like you automatically figure out where to need to run it. But in this particular case, we looked at the page and we said, actually, there's no need to actually run this on the client because the system is smart enough, because we use signals, and signals are smart enough to kind of realize, oh, you are just updating the span. So the
Mm-hmm.
only thing I need to know is if you increment the count, I need to update the span. And if I do that, then everything just works the way you would expect it.
Got it.
Now,
Got it. Okay.
let's break the signals for a second, just to kind of prove a point.
Okay.
So when it says count that value in the side of your span, put a negative in front of it. So you want to print the negative value, right? Now, as of right now, this causes a deopt inside of the inside of Qwik, but in the future we're going to handle this particular case as well. But let's just go for it for now. So what's just happened is we no longer can track the fact that this count is attached to this DOM value. We broke this, right? So
Oh,
now
so
if you
now we
refresh
get
the
the
page,
code.
now we get the code. But notice we didn't get the code for the layout or for the Qwik meta framework or for all the other stuff that needs to be running. We
Mm-hmm.
literally just got the code for the JSX. And now
Mm-hmm.
if you go to the console, you actually see that the counter is incrementing.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of a different mental model here, is that your component function is idempotent, just like in React, but it's not guaranteed to run. Like it may or may not run. We will see. And it may run on the server and it may run on the client. We will see. And oh, by the way, just to kind of prove a point, it always runs on a server, right? Because the initial render had to happen on a server. So on a server, you always get the counter
Mm-hmm.
piece. You may or may not get the counter piece on a client.
Got
But
it.
as a developer, you don't think about this, right? So if you remove the negative sign from the span, all of the right stuff just happens, and it just doesn't download and doesn't run. And
Right.
there's
Now
nothing
all that.
special you have to do as a developer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we mean by like the system just smart enough that the happy path, the normal path that you do, is actually the path that you want. So let's make a different, maybe do one more interesting example here.
Okay.
Let's say we want to run some code on the client eagerly. So let's make a new component underneath it called the clock, let's say. So the same exact thing. You say export const clock equals component $, the standard things.
I guess we can just do one of these then.
Yeah, that's fine. Fat arrow, yep. And let's just return a div and say data binded to time.value.
Okay.
And so now we're going to need to have a time. And so we're going to create a signal. Time equals use signal, and let's just start with let's just we could do that, but let's just do an empty string for a second.
Okay.
And now we need to say use client effect. Okay, and that's going to have a function, and this function will let's see, it will have to set up a timer that executes set interval that executes every 1 second, and every 1 second we will do new date time dot toString time dot value, right?
Got it. Okay, so time dot value equals new date to string.
Sure, we can do that.
Or wait, you want a date time, right?
Well, whatever, doesn't matter. Whatever, like it proves the same point.
Okay.
So you want to extract that function to a local variable, because the set interval won't run it for a second. So there's going to be like this delay before the web updates. So really, you want to invoke that function once manually and then every 1 second.
I gotcha. So we'll do function update clock.
You could just say const equals and then paste what you had in there. That also works. Sure, that's fine.
All right.
And
so then we're
just,
going to update the clock in our interval, but we'll also call it once.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. So now if you, oh yeah, and we have to refer to the clock inside of our span. So let's just refer to it. And you see that, it updates every 1 second. It's exactly what you would expect, right? And if you look at the network tab, you see that the code associated with the use client effect downloads, but nothing else, right? So now if you click on the increment button, it will download more code, right? Because now increment needs to be like, oh yeah, I need that code over here. And again, remember, in production, we would have all kinds of fancy prefetching, etc., so that the code will always be loaded eagerly so that you will never get in a situation where you're in a tunnel and something is not happening. But I want to show you a next interesting bit that I think will blow your mind. So above the clock, create a div.
Okay. Just 1 second here. All right, here we go. Above the clock. I'm in here or in here?
Line 13. Just create a div. And just say scroll down or something like that in there. And then the div needs to have a style. And so let's say style height is, let's say, 500 pixels.
Does that work, or is it a string value?
It's a string value. You have to put 500 px. Okay. So now notice you can scroll down and you will see, notice there's no JavaScript, right? And when you scroll the clock into position, the JavaScript shows up. But again, notice that as a developer, you didn't have to think about anything.
Right.
Because the system just has this mental model of like, I just want to do the bare minimum to get away with what the user, the developer asked me to do. And because the component is currently not visible, there's no need to download it. And so let's back up a little further. And let's talk about use client effect for a second.
Sure.
So use client effect runs on a client only. And the question then becomes like, well, when should we run it? And when existing systems, the answer is very obvious. Well, you run it during hydration. Like, where else would you run it?
Right.
But when you don't have hydration, then the question becomes like, so when are you supposed to run it? And so we thought about this for a while, and we kind of come to the conclusion of, well, there's really two choices. One choice is that you can run it eagerly when the system loads. And the other choice is that you can delay it until the component becomes visible. And so we made the visible part the default. You can also get the other behavior if you want, but we just made it default the other way. And it has this super cool behavior because, usually use client effect is used for things like looking at the DOM and measuring size, or, to kind of do an update or something specific. But in here, what we're basically saying is like, yeah, but like if it's below the fold, if it's not even visible, then why bother? Like, you're doing work that's unnecessary.
Right. So this is, again, going back to that concept of like make the right things easy and the wrong things hard. By doing it like this, I'm not having to, like, I don't even have to, as a developer, have a mental model of what the UI looks like, which is interesting, because a lot of times when I'm writing interfaces, I'm trying to think about not just like, does my code work, but where is this code going to live in the app? Exactly how is somebody going to use it? Is it the first thing they see or the second thing they see? Is it the thing we want them to click? Or is it like, if they don't do the thing we want them to do, it's also available? And there's so many little considerations like that lead to, when you're doing it in the most customer-centric way, it's a lot of mental overhead. And if you are in a rush, it's a lot of corners that tend to get cut because you don't have time. So you just, hey, render it all, people will figure it out. It's not that much slower. And I think you see that argument a lot where it's like, that's not that big a deal. And that's true sometimes.
Well, it adds up, right? Like every single one of these things is a small thing until it's not a small thing, until it's a big thing.
Yeah.
But I want to point out one thing, which is that as a developer, right? First of all, you put everything in a single file. I mean, you can have separate files, but in this case, we put everything in a single file because it was the easiest thing to do.
Right.
And also, we didn't really think about lazy loading at all.
Nope.
Right? Like, lazy loading was just not a thing we even thought about. And yet, the way the system behaves is this ideal representation of like, yeah, let me just extract a function and let me just download the code that you need and ignore everything else.
Yeah, you know, that actually, it didn't, you said that and it just clicked that this is code coming from the same file that I wrote, but it's loaded at different times. That is extremely cool. So I've got no code at all, and both my counter and my clock are in the same file. So when I scroll down here comes my clock, but it's just the clock. And then when I come up
just
here,
the client effect for the clock, right? Not even the clock
just
itself.
just the actual like functional logic to make this clock operate. And then here, when I click the increment button to actually interact with it, then I get this bit of client logic to make the increment work. That's really cool. That it knew to broke the code up, and it you know, like you said, it's not bringing in the actual component or the JSX or like the full code. It's just this little bit here that we need to run on the client, and it's just this little bit here to make these counts function. That is very, very cool. Oh, we just got a huge raid. What is up, Meaty Dev? Thank you very much for the raid and almost 500 of your friends. We're learning Qwik City right now. So this is a meta framework for Qwik. Qwik is a resumability based framework. So for everybody who just showed up, I got to show you this again. So look at this. So we just built this component, right? So here's our component for contacts, and it right now we're just kind of doing proof of concept here. So we've got this component that has a counter, and then it's got this clock. And what the counter does is it lets you increment a value, the standard hello world for any reactive framework. And then we've got the client effect down here that runs a clock, and we set a div to push this clock off screen. So when I reload the page here, you can see nothing is downloading. So no JavaScript here. We're skipping the Vite dev build, and we're looking only at JavaScript. So nothing downloads when you actually load the page. And then if I scroll down, here comes the clock, and it lazily loads just the client code to bring this clock in and make it function. And that's just this piece here. Note that it's not the full component. It's just the functional pieces to make the client side stuff work. And then when I come up here and I increment, then it loads this little bit of logic that lets the counter work. And these are both defined in the same file, but they actually get loaded as needed. That is freaking cool. That is extremely cool, and it's like by default behavior that makes things work really well. So absolutely love that. Thank you all for coming and hanging out. Miško, that was a little recap for everybody who just joined. What should we look at next?
I think we need to load some data from the server, right?
Let's do it. Okay. So I have. Do you have an API that you prefer? You just want me to grab one that I know of?
I usually cheat and I just like make up some data on a server. So let's just create a new function here on line 2 or 2.5, somewhere over there. Just insert a new function.
2.5.
And say, yeah, but that's how I tell people to do something, in between. Export const on get.
Okay, export const on get, like that.
Colon request handler.
Oh, like TypeScript, got it.
Yeah. And then equals, and then you do basically your standard function, flat arrow, etc. And let's just return some value here. So just say return, and let's do an object. You don't have to do an array, but sure, you can do an array. You do you. Return something, whatever you want.
Okay, so let's just do something simple here. We'll do like an ID, and it's a contact form, so we'll do a name. So we'll do one for me, and add one more, and this is going to be...
Sounds good. Wow, you even got the Karen in there. I love you, man.
All right, so we've got basic contacts here.
Yes. Okay, so let's go to our component and let's get a hold of this data.
Okay.
So the way you get a hold of this data is you say const endpoint equals use endpoint.
Endpoint equals use endpoint. There it is.
Okay, and we want to make you don't no arguments to it because it knows that it's on the same place, but it's a function call, so you have to call it.
Got it.
And we have to.
When I say use endpoint, it just knows that because we register to get that it works.
Correct.
Oh, so this is sort of like the like for folks who've played with Remix, the way that action and
Yes, loader.
Yeah, action and loader work. So this is sort of like loader.
Yep.
Nice, very nice.
So,
Okay.
but we need to get typings in there. So use endpoint, call it with, get the brackets in there and say type of on get.
Type of on get like that. No, that was the wrong thing. This one.
Correct.
Get out of here.
And so in this case, your request handler, is it smart enough? If you hover over on get, is it smart enough to infer the type or not really?
Request
Sorry,
handler.
line 4, if you hover over on 4.
No.
Yeah, it's unknown. So give it a type. So request handler bracket. And in here, you can just say, well, it's going to be an array of ID string.
We can fake this out real quick. Let's just do one of these, right?
Sure.
So we'll do a type contact, and that's going to be the ID is a number and the name is a string. Okay,
Correct.
so now we've got an actual thing here, and this is going to give us our on get. It gives us, ooh, there's our contacts.
That's right.
And so now
we know that it's a contact. Yeah.
That's great. Okay.
Okay. Now, the thing to understand here is that typically the way frameworks do this is that the component says, I need this data. But if you think about it, that kind of doesn't really work with streaming, because by the time you stream the component, like it might be several milliseconds later, and at that point to go and fetch the data is kind of backwards. Instead, what you want to do is that the moment the request comes in, you want to start fetching data, and then you want to start streaming the component as soon as you can, right? And so the onGet executes first. In your onGet, you would go and talk to a database. onGet can be asynchronous, right? So you talk to your database. And while you're talking to the database, the layout starts rendering, the component starts rendering, and at some point, you're going to get to the component where you want to render the contacts from the server. And hopefully, by the time you get to this point, the database has responded. If not, we'll wait for it, and then later we can do out-of-order streaming, which is some advanced stuff we're working on. But the point I'm trying to make here is that there is a reason why the fetching happens in the onGet method, because the onGet method executes before any sort of JSX is rendered, right? It's the first thing that comes in. We want to get the database call going as soon as possible, right?
Yep.
Okay, so now I want to get rid of, get kind of actually printed out. So maybe get rid of the, we can keep the buttons over there. That's fine too. Right after, on line 33, say in JSX, say resource with capital R, angle bracket resource. Okay, value equals endpoint. And then we can do onloading, but we can skip that. But you would normally do like onloading, you would say loading or something like that. But then you just say on resolved. Okay, and so that is going to be, to the curlies. And then in here, you put a function which will get the data. So notice what you get over there is, actually, it's not data, you'll be contacts, right? Notice that the system correctly infers that like, oh, you can get contacts over here. And so in here, we just do our standard return, and we probably do contacts.map.
Yeah, we can do like a UL, and then we'll do a contacts.map, and in here we'll get contact, and it knows that, which is freaking cool. So I'm going to do we'll just do like contact dot, and there's the autocomplete for name, like magic, and I broke it.
I think you have to say return over there. First of all, you forgot to close your resource.
Forgot to close my resource.
Line 42.
Very important.
And then I think on
type void is not assigned.
Line 37, you have to say returned over there. Yes.
There we go. There we go. I did it.
There you go. Right. There you go. So we got data from the server to the client.
Okay. So just breaking this down real quick, we did a request for data, and that gives us this onGet just executes. Does this execute server side? Like, is this being?
Yes. onGet is always server side.
Got it. Okay, so this is server-side fetching. And so it loads our data. And then when we call this use endpoint, it grabs in the data that was returned from here. So whatever we return, that's what we get here. And that then gets passed into this resource, which is a built-in helper to load.
You can think of endpoint as a promise, if that helps.
It's a promise. Got it. Okay. Okay.
It's a little more complicated than a promise, but fundamentally it acts as a promise.
Sure.
And so in this case, with the resource, we're basically saying, look, there's a promise. You need to resolve it before you do something useful with it, right? And so at this point, the resource allows you to basically say on pending, which you can say something like, loading your contacts or something like that. And then, unresolved, we'll do the right stuff.
Right. Something
now,
like
what's
that.
interesting here is that the use endpoint is intelligent enough to kind of understand, like, if I'm on a server, I can just call on get directly. But if I'm on the client, then I need to call on get through a fetch.
Okay.
Right. But you don't have to worry about it as a developer. You're like, fundamentally, what's happening is that use endpoint will get data from on get.
Okay. And so it's doing this on the server side. So when would this ever run on the client?
If you would have client-side navigation, if this particular component would become visible later, because it's not currently visible, but it becomes visible later, right? There are scenarios where this could execute on the client, yeah.
Gotcha.
And oh, by the way, look at your network tab. No JavaScript so far still.
Right.
So a next typical thing people do is they usually want to have like a search, right? So let's maybe on line 28.5, you say const filter equals use signal empty string.
Okay.
And then maybe on line 39, you create an input.
Okay, so we'll do like a search input, and
there's an input called search. I did not know that.
It gives you like type hints in the like in mobile, at least it'll give you a little like magnifying glass and stuff. Let's see. Is it gonna show? It doesn't give you anything here, but it's still cool.
So I always forget this. Is it on change or on value? What is it, the method here?
Let's find out. On change. There is an on change. There is not an on value. So we're going to go with on change. And that is the magic of TypeScript.
Yeah. But I feel like it's still not the right one, because I think on change only fires when you lose focus or something like that. I always forget this.
Maybe it's on input. Oh no, did I break it?
Maybe it is on input.
On input?
Yeah, that's what it is. It's on input. I've done this demo so many times and I can never remember. Anyways, so let's write a function here. So this function takes e, which is our event, right? And basically we just want to say filter dot value equals e dot target dot value, I believe.
Sounds right.
And I believe you have to cast e dot target into HTML input. That's the event. You manually have to do it. Like e.target, you have to put in parentheses and you say as HTML.
Yeah. I see. This is HTML input.
Yeah, I think so.
Is that right?
Auto-completed. I think it's not HTML input. It's HTML input element or something. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Okay, now it's happy.
So we got
so that should work, except now we're not doing anything with the endpoint. I just want to point out something interesting, though. Label 4. Oh yeah, you're doing fancy stuff.
Just doing a little search here so that it's so that it stops yelling at me about accessibility. And then we'll give it one of these. We'll give it a search. There we go. Now we have an accessible input, and we click on it, and it does the whole thing.
Nice.
So then I can do one of these. I'll do like a little type, and it's now saving the filter, but we're not actually doing anything with it.
That's right. So let's see, where do we have the filter? It is line 57. So you should say contacts dot filter, and then you pass in a function which will.
And we can do like it'll be like contact. No. What do I want? Yes. Contact dot
name dot two lowercase dot index of filter dot value.
Sure, yeah, that'll work. Filter dot value. I think it'll work.
And if that's not equal to -1, I think, or something, I think you have to compare it to -1.
All right, because it would be. Or you know what? I think we can even do is it contains or includes?
Oh, yeah.
Includes.
Includes. Yeah, there you go. I keep thinking the old way of doing it. There you go. Look at that.
All right. Okay, so check this out. No JavaScript, a little bit for the increment, a little bit for the clock, a little bit for the search. Like, that's incredibly cool that it does all that. And so when we do the search, because we're now re-rendering, it has to load in the JSX and everything, because now we're actually like building DOM. And so you need the JSX library to make that function.
Correct.
But what I love about this is that this is very much what I would want my framework to do, that I am never going to build myself. Like there is no part of me that is going to take the time to actually go and build all of this like selective rendering and do these things. It'll be in my head. I'll feel guilty about it, and I definitely won't do it. And so I think this is the power of a framework that's got this as like a default. So I think that like this benefit is so tangible right out of the gate. And we can even see, like, even with something as simple as this hello world, where we've kind of got 3 little independent components, each of which is pretty small. If we were loading all of this code all the time, like, you know, with React, that'd be what, 30 something kilobytes of default React framework, and then another couple kilobytes of component. And it's like, if I just load this page and then I'm like, oh, that's what I wanted, and I click on me, I didn't need any JavaScript. I just needed to see the name and then click into the contact. But we would have loaded all this extra junk that wasn't necessary for the interaction that I the user, was trying to accomplish. So by making it opt-in like this, where when I look at the clock, then we load the clock. When I click the increment button, then we load the increment button. When I do a search, then we implement that. This is really powerful stuff.
Maybe we should contrast this against micro-island architectures. I think it's a good point to talk about it right now.
Sure.
So one thing you would have to do with the micro-islands is you would have to basically tell the system where the island is, right? Mm-hmm. So somewhere, let's say we would say like this component that we have just written is our own island. So you would do that, and you would also have to basically say under which conditions should it hydrate? And you would probably say something like on mouse over or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. With in the case of a clock, it's even more complicated, because it's like, now you kind of have to hydrate it eagerly, whether you like it or not, because like, you know, there's no way to tell micro-island architecture that hydrate on where a sub portion of it is visible, right? You could probably say when the component's visible, or rather the island is visible, but you can't say like portion of the island is visible.
Yeah, that'd be really challenging. Like for our single file component here, we'd probably have to load the whole thing if we built it like this in an island's architecture.
So first of all, you would explicitly have to say where the island boundary is. You would explicitly have to say under which conditions it loads. And once it hydrates, you would execute the whole thing, right? Because the framework would have to go and visit every single component that is on in that island and see if there's any listeners, just to collect the listeners and attach them and make them interactive, right? So this whole file would have to download and eagerly execute. Again, this file is tiny, who cares, right? But again, think about like as the app gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? The amount of code that you would have to eagerly download and execute just kind of increases. And so the kind of the cool bit here is you didn't have to do anything as a developer, just the right stuff just happened.
I think that to me, this feels like the core innovation here is that we've inverted our thinking about apps to where by being lazy, I am getting the best possible outcome. And now, you know, it's probably important to just do a little reminder here that we can do things to de-opt this. Like if I do this bit of processing here, I can get myself into trouble.
Well, you're not really in trouble, right? Like you slightly increased the amount of code that downloaded.
Sure.
You only messed up that one component, right? You didn't de-opt the whole app. Just extra component showed up.
That's actually a great point, because even if I do like screw up in Qwik, the blast radius is contained.
That's right.
That's okay. So that kind of feels like an interesting side benefit of, you know, now I'm able to go, and I know that like mostly it's going to go well. And if I do something that's not optimal, it's only contained to that one component. So, naturally, again, with any amount of applied effort, anybody can make a mess out of anything. So, your mileage may vary here, but the default, the happy path is pretty happy.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, is that it's hard to mess up more than the component you're in. But even in that case, like even if you mess the component up, like really all you did is you just made the amount of JavaScript to increase just for that component, right? Not for the other part of the system.
Yeah.
The other kind of thing to point out is if you go down to the clock, currently the clock is interactive, right? But if we just comment out the use client effect, we'll basically make this in an inert component, so to speak, right? And now what you're going to notice is that no matter what you do, you will just not be able to get that code to download, right? So even if you de-opt the top component and more JavaScript downloads for the top component, it will never descend to the child component. Like,
interesting.
You could go crazy here and do whatever you want. You will never descend to the child component because the system's like, that child is inert. There's no need to go and visit it.
That's one of my all-time favorite things about being a developer, is wondering what would happen if somebody who had no context were to walk in the middle of one of these conversations, and it's you and me talking, and somebody walks in from the next room. That child is inert.
But you could do it even. We could do even something more interesting. So here, create a new component called clock wrapper.
Okay.
So uncomment that.
I'm going to do a quick time check. We got like 7 more minutes. Is that enough time?
Yeah, we'll do the clock wrapper to kind of prove a point, and then we'll call it a day.
Okay.
So create, the standard stuff. And yep.
Okay.
And so in here, you just return the clock or P or whatever you want to do, and then put a clock inside of it.
Okay, so we're going to start with clock. Nope. All right.
Yeah, yep. And then go to the top, and instead of clock wrapper, yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the thing I want to point out is that the clock is running.
Mm-hmm.
The component on the top is interactive, but the component in between, the clock wrapper, that never downloads and never executes. And as a matter of fact, there's nothing you can do as a user to cause that thing to execute.
Okay. And so as we get down here, we've got our clock component, but we don't have anything in here. This is just, and the other cool thing about this is, like, we didn't really look under the hood, but you can kind of see as things are happening. And this is the quick inspector is because of the dev mode, right?
Yeah, so the inspector is this cool thing. So, okay, I didn't know it's already published. I believe you hit the control key and then click on anywhere in the UI, in the application. Control, maybe Alt, one of those, Shift, one of these keys. There we go, click. Ooh. Takes you directly to the source code.
Holy shit. Oh no, I broke it.
A button. I guess that
doesn't work. Okay, all right. It's okay. We'll well, it was cool the first time. All right, let's try one. Let's try one more time. We'll go here. Okay, maybe I'm a little ahead of the curve on this. But this is extremely cool.
Yeah. So, like, for example, click on the examples on the top. If you hover over it, don't click on it. I mean, use the special.
Oh, I gotcha.
The special key. I don't know which one it is.
No,
that's not it.
I opened it in a split window.
You'll see a different hover over it. There you go. That thing. If you click there, then it should take you to the correct source code. No, it's not taking you?
I think something may have just gone wrong with my
because it worked
VS
the first
Code.
time. Yeah.
It worked the first time, and then it crashed VS Code the second time. So I probably need to restart things to get it to work. Did it crash all the way on me? It did. Okay, so maybe that's the problem. Let's get back in here. We'll try one more time. Alt, click. There it is.
Yes, there you go. Isn't that amazing?
That is sick. That's sick. Okay, so 5 minutes left.
Imagine you come to code base that you're not familiar with, and you're like, where the hell is this thing, right? It's like, click, there it is.
That is extremely useful. Like I can definitely see there's huge value in those little convenience things. And I would be very surprised if we don't see a bunch of frameworks start picking up that idea, because that's real smart. Okay, so with our last 5 minutes before I break us down here, is there anything else that you want to show off, or resources you want people to be aware of? Like what should we do with these last couple minutes?
Yeah, so let's talk about the future, I think.
Let's do it.
One of the things we are working on is we really want to make sure that type safety is all throughout the system. You kind of saw it how, the type safety went between the onGet method and use endpoint, and it kind of knew like how the data that goes through it. But we want to extend this everywhere. We want to take it to type, to routes. So that if you type a URL, it will complain if the URL doesn't actually have a route associated with it. Search parameters, so the search parameters will complain and say like, hey, you said that whatever is required and you didn't provide it, or you asked for a number and you're giving me a string or something of that sort.
Yeah,
and the same thing for forms as well, and also for form validation and also URL validation, so that when you say like, oh, I take a off-page offset is a number. Well, if you give me anything but a number, then I'm going to complain and say like, nope, that's not how this works, right? And this is important because a lot of times developers just kind of trust the input of the URL, and URL input is so easily hackable, right?
URL input is really challenging.
Yeah.
Like it's just, it's a free form text input at the end of the day.
yeah, it is. So we just want to kind of make it again out of the box. It's going to be set up in a way where in order to get the type system, you automatically have to provide a validator, and then the validator will automatically complain saying like, you said it's a string, but it's not. So, I'm not going to let you do this.
Yeah. That's super cool. What's the best place if people want to follow along with development when these features are ready for testing or for prime time?
Our Discord is definitely the place to go. Oh, the other thing I want to mention, I completely forgot, is we have a bridge to React. So you can take your React components and run them inside of Qwik. You won't get all these magical benefits that I've showed you here because it's a Qwik. On the end of the day, it's a React code base.
Okay.
But we can delay hydrate Qwik components. Basically, you get like kind of island architecture for React within Qwik and out of the box.
Where would one look into that?
Go to our website, qwik.builder.io, and search for React. There's a search box on the top.
Oh, there it is. Got
it. What? Okay, there it is.
This
Qwik
one?
React. There we go. Yes.
Okay, let's drop that in here. Very, very cool. And so the Qwik add React, and then that's cool. That's very cool. Awesome. All right. So then I'm also going to direct people to the GitHub. Good place to, ask questions, follow along with development, all those good things. Give it a star. That's always a good call. And then I will also drop Miško's Twitter one more time. Anywhere else? I've dropped the Discord chat. We've shared the links to Qwik City, Qwik React. Anywhere else that people should be looking if they want to do more with Qwik?
I think you got the basics. I think the biggest thing is just come check out our community on Discord, and you can talk to lots and lots of like-minded folks about these things.
Excellent. All right. Well, Miško, I think with that, we're going to go ahead and call this one a resounding success. So this episode, like every episode, has been closed captioned. Thank you to Rachel for coming over here from White Coat Captioning to make that possible. That is sponsored by Netlify, NX, and New Relic, who all kick in to make the show more accessible to more people, which means a lot to me. While you're clicking on things on the website, please make sure you check out the schedule. We've got all sorts of great stuff coming up on the show. On Thursday, I'm going to be porting the Learn with Jason blog over to Astro. If you want to learn about Auth0 actions, which can do a lot, we're going to have Will Johnson over on the show. And then we've got, this one actually got rescheduled. I need to change it. It's going to be a little bit later. I'm going to be out of town next Thursday. So tune in. Make sure you subscribe. I have a newsletter now. Please subscribe to that newsletter because I need it. Please and thank you. But yes, so yes, please, do the thing, do the subscribe, follow on Twitch, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe to the newsletter, because all of that is very good for my own ego when I see the numbers go up. Miško, thank you so much for hanging out today. This was an absolute blast.
Jason, thanks for having me again. You're awesome.
Of course. All right, we're going to go find somebody to raid. Thank you all so much for hanging out. We will see you next time.